Somebody who can also spot a Psy-Op from space. Somebody who has a keen eye for things like this, and somebody who's actually served in our country's Navy, joins the program now to illuminate for us what actually happened at the bottom of the ocean here, and who perhaps should be at the bottom of the ocean. The great Jack Posobiec joins us now. I'm not saying you're a member of the Biden family, Jack. You wouldn't actually put people in cement shoes, throw them in the bottom of the ocean. But there are people who lie to us professionally, who deserve probably worse fates than they're getting. And you have been skeptical of this story last night. You got community noted on Twitter when you said, wait a second, the government knew about this. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, the community note didn't say that you were wrong. No. It just says that no one knows.
Right. So that's exactly right, Benny. So we got this community note after posting up. So we're doing, and Charlie and I are doing this thought crime show on Thursday. So I see the Wall Street Journal article comes out with this explosive headline: United States Navy detected the catastrophic event, right? It was implosion, not an explosion, but same idea in terms of acoustics. That I know from my experience in the Navy, I know from my experience as a Navy officer, that the United States Navy has had assets for 45, 50 years in that part of the ocean. Why? To detect submarines. They are early warning sonar arrays. Some of the earliest examples of this were called the SOSIS array. There's like Tom Clancy novels about this, obviously, where it's a very well-known, very famous system that the United States implemented in the Cold War to detect, at the time, Soviet submarines that we were worried about coming into our waters. So to me, when I first heard about this story, kind of putting on my cap, right, as having been in the Navy and have been on a submarine, have sat in the sonar room of a United States Navy submarine, ballistic missile submarine, I'm not saying I'm like a submarine expert or anything, but I've done some sub stuff, put it that way. And one of the first thoughts I had when looking at this story was, well, if they didn't pick up any sound on the array, then that to me said that they were more than likely stuck. Because the first thing I thought of was, well, they would have picked up the sound on the array if this thing had actually gone under, if it had been destroyed in a catastrophic event. The Navy would have known that within the first seconds of checking the actual system. And then, of course, and we were told 3 days ago by Admiral Jack Kirby in the White House, Benny, and I've got it right here. He said, President Biden is watching events closely surrounding the missing submarine. He pointed to ongoing search efforts by the U.S. Coast Guard, Canadian officials, other agencies, said the U.S. Navy is on standby should they be needed because they have deep water capabilities that the Coast Guard wouldn't necessarily have. At no point in any of that did he mention anything about this sonar detection. And then he also added, all of us, including the president, express our thoughts to the crew on board, as well as, no doubt, the worried family members back on shore. Now, Benny, people have said to me, well, wait a minute, this was classified information. Certainly we have to keep classified information safe, et cetera, et cetera. All right, cut the crap. We all know that the sonar array is there. There's like a Wikipedia page about it. Anyone can go and look at this. So the very first thing that they would have come to the president with his morning briefing would have been, on Sunday or, later in the day on Sunday. Sir, there's a mini sub that went down, just for your information. There's a lot of headlines about this. Do we pick it up on sonar? Yes, we did. We picked up a catastrophic explosion. And then the question is, okay, do we go public with it? Do we put this out? Do we let people know that we heard something, but we're not 100, even if it's without 100% certainty that there was this catastrophic detection? Because you could certainly still have the search and rescue. Obviously, no one's saying they should have called that off. But at the same time, going back to what you just said, Rolling Stone was tipped off by internal reports from the Department of Homeland Security.
Yes.
About the tapping. And this is key. This wasn't a media narrative. This was a government-backed narrative. What's the connection there? Just so people know, when the Department of Homeland Security was stood up after 9/11, one of the components, or a number of the components, but I should say, of pre-existing agencies within the government were folded into the Department of Homeland Security. Famously, the Secret Service, ICE, it was INS at the time, so ICE went into the Homeland Security, and another one of those was actually the United States Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard, even though it's considered a branch of the military, actually, for accounting purposes and command and control, it actually falls under the Department of Homeland Security. So when your report there says DHS memos went to Rolling Stone, that's actually Coast Guard information coming up through DHS and then somehow magically finding its way to gracing the pages of Rolling Stone, which then the Coast Guard the very next day came out and pushed as well and said publicly, yes, we did detect noises. And so this is a story, by the way, and Benny, look, for, take the Navy hat off for a second, put the media hat back on. There's only one story that drives the news every day. There's one. Well, it could be Trump getting arrested. It could be the indictment. It could be a I-95 collapse the other day, right outside of Philadelphia, where I'm from, and you were the other day. The idea that you're going to penetrate with more than one story, it's a joke. And so all these websites, Daily Mail, New York Post, they push things down. I'm not on TikTok myself, but I've been reliably informed by my Zoomer intelligence agents that TikTok has been wall to wall, nothing but mini sub, Titanic, etc. all week. It's the only thing that you can find on TikTok is more stories about the sub, what could happen to the sub, how could this have happened, et cetera, et cetera. So anything else that would have come this week, Hunter Biden, the plea deal, the informant, the whistleblowers, all of this, it's been totally, pun intended, not intended, I don't know, blown out of the water by this story of the submarine, or submersible, actually, because it's not self-propelled. So the idea that the White House, right? And so this is my inference, and this is what's so ridiculous, that apparently you're not allowed to ask questions about what the government is doing, especially an administration that has publicly admitted that they take cues from the West Wing and Aaron Sorkin, and we've caught them doing this multiple times over on Human Events with various scripts that they pulled together, certainly with Ukraine. And we know that they play the media. We know they play the media cycle. Ben Rhodes, when he was in the Obama administration, once famously said to the New York Times that many of the reporters that we work with on a regular basis are 25, 26 years old. They have no experience in the outside world on issues like foreign policy issues. Like he was talking about the Iran deal at the time, but he said they have no experience. So they just take whatever we say and they repeat it. So whenever we tell them something, their only experience is being around a campaign for like a year or two, maybe once around the campaign trail, and they have no idea what the underlying background is. So when you're taking something like this, would these reporters have even known to ask about the SOSUS array? Would they have been known to ask about how mobile surveillance or towed array surveillance of sonar arrays actually work, active sonar, passive sonar, et cetera, et cetera? The basic stuff that anyone, even like, again, I'm not a submariner, but I've done a little bit of sub stuff, and I know a lot of the basics of systems that we have and assets that are in the area. To his credit, Congressman Dan Crenshaw, himself a Navy officer, Navy SEAL, so again, not a submariner, but someone who understands a lot about that world, was asking questions and was very vocal. Why was the U.S. government blocking the use of the Magellan system? Why was the Magellan system not put into use? It can travel down to 6,000 meters. That's about 18,000 feet. Why was it blocked? They said that it was ready to go, didn't let it go. The French were there. Right, the French were allowed to come in, but the Magellan system, not so much. We now know, Benny, it looks like they were playing politics, and the logical inference, right, that we're making by stringing all this together is that they knew, right? And of course, I'm making an assertion, I'm making an assessment, I'm analyzing the situation and looking at the White House's PR strategy to say that it looks like they were playing politics because they certainly would have known that there was bad news coming on Hunter Biden this week. And it seems like they had all the incentive in the world to make the entire country focused on the shiny object out there at the bottom of the sea, rather than let people know what was coming about the president's own son, I am making this logical inference. And again, I'm being told on Twitter all day, I've been telling Newsweek's very upset with me. How dare you ask questions about what your government is doing? How dare you be skeptical of things? Don't, the same people that 3 years ago were telling me there's no way that a virus could have leaked out of a lab in China, and it definitely wasn't modified in that lab in China in any possible way. The crazy Jack Posobiec is saying things like that. When you ask questions about the Hunter Biden laptop, which we later find out that actually the FBI had already verified 1 year prior to us bringing it up on War Room and the New York Post putting it out. And then, of course, questions about vaccines, et cetera, any COVID measures at all. You're not allowed to question, if any. We aren't allowed to ask questions anymore. How dare you just go down to Safeway, go buy a couple more rolls of tinfoil, I guess.
So we put up the tweet here. We haven't put up a Dan Crenshaw tweet in a very long time, Jack.
Hey,
but I have Jack and Dan Crenshaw agreeing on something. You're talking two very different wings of the party. You have Crenshaw here. Both Crenshaw and Jack have military experiences. Both of them understand the military systems and their operations and their capacities very well, better than I. And both of these guys are saying, what the hell is going on? Why isn't America at this crash site right now? And Crenshaw's been going off on Twitter for days now, saying, wait a second, we could have been out there in an hour. And more importantly, we know exactly where this sub was. We knew exactly where this thing was. Do you think this is, by the way, the Titanic doesn't exist like in Antarctica or in England. It exists off the coast of Massachusetts. Like right. The Titanic is the crash of the Titanic is pretty close to the American shoreline.
And it's also not mobile.
You're right. That's right. So we knew where they
can't
were.
Go anywhere.
Right. So I guess this ultimately is my question for you, Jack. Why? If you're on the same side as Dan Crenshaw here, something's horribly wrong. And this is not against you or Dan. I'm just saying, like, if you both are able to see the same thing clearly, something has gone awfully wrong here. So why? Why keep this information from the American public? You could have ended this news cycle on Sunday evening saying, there was a big implosion and these guys are gone. And best of luck. Why torture the family? Why torture the children? Why torture the news cycle?
And this is one of those stories as well where in I'll just, not to blow up my own family members here, but in the family chat, right? It's like all the women in my life are just suddenly asking, hey, what's up with the sub? What's going on? Are those guys going to be okay? Are they going to be all right? I guest hosted for Timcast the other night. And, you're putting together stories. And of course, our main focus was Hunter Biden, all of the revelations. But in that 2-hour show, I said, let's throw a segment on the sub just because it's such a big story. And at the time, and I said before, I thought about this and I said, well, if the Navy isn't saying anything and the Navy hasn't come forward and said, yes, we found this information. And by the way, of course, the president has the ability to declassify that information if he wants to, especially for obvious humanitarian reasons in this situation. I think there's a very clear public interest in wanting to declassify that information. So I see people, pretending that the government is like some Tom Clancy novel. The secret agents are going to save us. No, it's not like that. Okay. No, I don't know. I don't think I was being cynical enough, Benny. I actually realized that I wasn't being cynical enough to believe that the U.S. government would sit on information like this. And by the way, if you're someone who is sitting there as a working reporter, if you're one of these White House correspondents that goes in, day out, you really have to ask the question, why didn't Jack Kirby say anything? Why did Jack Kirby say our thoughts and prayers are with the worried families when he already knew in the back of his mind? Because of James Cameron, who obviously very famous undersea explorer, in addition to being the director of Titanic, Avatar, lesser known Avatar 2, but also Terminator 2, so I'll give him credit, and The Abyss, which is an undersea movie, who is credited with having the deepest dive on record. Challenger Deep, which he traversed out of Naval Station Guam about a year before I was stationed at Naval Station Guam for Pacific operations, East Asia operations, that he called this a nightmarish charade, right? James Cameron called it a nightmarish charade. He said, why am I turning on the news every single day when he could pick up the phone? This is a small community. Okay, it's a very small community of people that are involved in deep sea exploration. And he said that he knew within hours on Monday morning that there had been a detection on the sonar array, that something had come up. So people knew. OceanGate probably knew as well, by the way, which is a completely separate discussion from all of this. So, I mean, I get the idea that you want to hold out hope. You want to believe that there's a possibility, hope without hope, that maybe there was an explosion and, the cylinder was still intact. Sure, fine. But why not put that information out? And I think there's a lot of people who had a lot of incentives to keep that information quiet. I don't think it was, some orchestrated situation where Biden is like planting depth charges on it or something, and Hunter is like swimming up with his, using his crack pipe like a periscope or like a snorkel or something. Oh, Dad, it's okay. I can still breathe. I'm still getting my crack.
I got him in Nord Stream. I can get him here.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Why didn't they send out the Odessa Diving Club to go and Vladimir Zelensky with his boys to go out and take a look at this? No, Benny, I think that a lot of people cynically use this story as a cover for, look, and I'll just say how it works in DC. They call it a bad news dump cycle. And what I mean to say is, if there's a catastrophe going on, if there is a tragedy, if there is some national story or international story in this case, that is taking up the news cycle, that's when you want to dump all your bad news. This is a time-honored PR practice in Washington, D.C. that is used on both sides of the aisle, okay? On both sides of the aisle, where if there is something going on that is an absolute disaster, sometimes we used to call them Big News Fridays, right? Big News Friday is another example of this, where people are checked out, they're leaving work, they're getting into, weekend events. I got buddies that already drove down the shore for this weekend. They're unplugged, right? They're not looking at this. They're going to the beach with their families. That's when you drop any negative stories that you have to get in front of. It's like, oh yeah, and by the way, that whole thing with my son's taking a plea deal with federal charges, but it's whatever. It's just, he just lied to the ATF a little bit. If you or I did that, we'd get the same deal, I'm sure. That is how this was cynically used, and this has been, and what I'm here to say is that Biden's not the only one who operates like this. This is a very common thing in politics. It's a common thing in DC, and quite frankly, I would be surprised if he didn't do it. But what is really surprising is the fact that we now know, okay, the president, or at least the administration, had this information, chose to not declassify it, which obviously he's allowed to, because that's sort of President Trump's entire defense. And obviously the president can declassify whatever he wants, whenever he wants to. Why did he choose not to declassify? Why didn't you declassify the file, President Biden? Why?
Yes. It seems particularly cruel. It seems cruel to the families. You knew the fate of these men and on Sunday, and you tortured people for 5 days. And why? And I think the answer is pretty clear. Jack,
we weren't
thank
cynical
you
enough, Benny. We weren't. we've reached new lows, lower even than the Titanic, apparently.
Thank you, Jack, for your clarity on this, and also for your expertise, and also for looking and just being a skeptic. It's okay to be a skeptic. You're never wrong if you're a skeptic. Skepticism is necessary, and that's why you have to follow Jack on Twitter. Here is his Twitter account. 2.1 million people can't be wrong. Go follow Jack right now. And also, of course, follow his writing at The Post Millennial and Human Events. Thank you, Jack, for being on the program.
Appreciate it, Benny. See you in West Palm.
See you.